What's up, you guys? Today we're going to be comparing the OEM Bilstein TRX shocks to the ADS MBR shocks. Make sure you subscribe because in the next video we're going to be comparing these to these. So let's take a look at the Bilstein shocks. On this side, these are a 355mm body shock, which translates to 2.6 Freedom units. This is a single hose reservoir that goes back behind here. These shocks have 3 zones, one bump zone, one when you're fully off the ground zone. These are electronically dampened with compression and rebound using these sensors that are on all 4 corners. Ram advertises 13 inches of rear wheel travel and 12 inches of front wheel travel. On this truck, we're rocking the ADS MBR shocks. These shocks are multi-ring bypass. On the inside, there are rings along the body that move as the shock travels. 2 hoops that go over to the external reservoir. Back here, there's a one-way check valve. So as the shock is traveling, it sends fluid through one side and it comes out the other. This reservoir is 4-way adjustable for rebound and compression. On the inside, it's dual adjustable for fine and large adjustment. And also rock 12.06 inches of shock travel in the rear and 6.6 inches of shock travel in the front. Overall, this whole system for the whole truck costs $9.6 thousand for the shocks alone. We're also rocking the iBox springs, front and rear. These ones are the heavy duty springs because I will be pre-landing this truck, so there will be an extra 400 pounds or so on the rear. So keep that in mind for the comparison today. That weight is not on here, so it's a little extra bouncy. One thing to note for the reservoir versus the competition, this is a 2.5 inch diameter reservoir versus some of the competition. Now that you guys know the specs, let's see how they perform. Starting off with the OEM suspension in auto mode. In auto mode, it puts the suspension by default into street. The first thing you're going to kind of notice with this suspension is how soft it is. Lots of people report that it feels almost under dampened or under shocked, and we're going to notice it right here when we go over this speed bump. It kind of feels like a Cadillac, like it's going to bounce a little bit. Lots of people in the forums kind of report this as kind of a complaint. Putting it into sport mode, in my opinion, the first thing you're going to notice is significant change. First off, it's not a gimmick. Like it definitely does change the valving right off the bat. It feels extremely firm. So you hit a speed bump, it's almost jarring. That's kind of all the changes you're going to notice for street. Okay, jumping into our off-road review. Put this suspension in Baja. First thing you're going to notice is, again, the suspension change. I don't know the exact figures. I don't think they're published by Ram, but auto feels like it's not really checking the active suspension very much. Sport feels like it's also not checking it. It feels like it just puts it on the maximum hardness. Baja really feels like the most, where it is checking it constantly and changing the valving as you're driving. You're going to really notice this when you're jumping the car or going through whoops. Kind of the note there with Baja is when you're driving flat and then you hit something like a speed bump or a whoop off-road, the suspension doesn't have enough time to adjust, and so it just feels very abrupt, very firm in that sense. However, when you do get all 4 tires off the ground in like a jump, it does have enough time to get the feedback from the sensors. And the sensors all say, hey, we're at the max droop, which means we're off the ground, which means this is going to be a hard impact. So it adjusts that valving, and it does have a very gracious landing in Baja mode. Okay, jumping into the Ram with the ADS MBR shocks. The first thing you're going to notice driving on the street is the suspension is kind of a happy medium between the street suspension setting for the OEM shocks and the sport suspension setting for the OEM shocks. It's not that like super plush Cadillac ride, but it's also not that rigid feeling of sport where it kind of feels like you're driving on 2x4s. But I hit a speed bump here. This is a great test to see kind of how it drives on the road. No awkward kind of bouncing at the end. It absorbs it really well. One thing to note with these MBR shocks is they are an internal bypass. They have 7 zones of dampening where the rings, and I'll try and get a clip from ADS to show the internal workings of this. They do make a little sound when they hit the upper and lower rings as you're kind of going through that shock travel. It's not as bad as external bypasses by any means, but just something to note that, you know, when my fiance got in and drove the truck for the first time after we got the shock, she said, I think something's wrong. No, that's how they're designed, but if this is a truck you daily and you really don't want the most extreme off-road race performance shock, these might not be for you. Another thing with these is you do get a warning light for the off-road suspension. It says limit off-road maneuverability. You hit the OK button when you first get in, and it goes away for the rest of the drive. So those are 2 kind of minor complaints that if you're thinking about buying these shocks and you really don't want the most out of your truck, right? Maybe this is just one of 7 off-road cars you have. These shocks are really more for, hey, I'm pushing this truck off-road, I want the best, and I'm going to sacrifice the daily drivability of this for that. Quick video to show what warning lights come on when you turn on your truck. Many people do report the check engine light coming on after you put on the suspension. That's not true. That is for a aftermarket intercooler pump that I put on. Those are the 2 warning lights right there. If you just hit OK, for them they go away for the rest of the drive. Alrighty, jumping into the off-road capability of these shocks. These shocks are exactly what I wanted. I didn't like the kind of gimmicky Baja mode where it didn't have really enough time to adapt, and that valving is extremely small, so it's basically just on or off completely. There isn't enough variability in the Baja stock Bilsteins to be effective. And these shocks, there's no gimmicks, it's not electronic. They are 4-way adjustable, and it absorbs these whoops extremely well. The jumps it comes down, it's very soft. One thing to note for the off-road section is I am running heavier springs in the rear to combat a cap that I'm putting on that weighs about 400 pounds. So currently there is a bit of rear spring back when we hit whoops. This isn't the shock's fault, it's my fault. I haven't put that cap back on yet, so it's tuned for it, but I haven't done it yet. I expect that once the cap is on and it kind of settles that rear, these are going to be perfect. With these shocks, I've done a few jumps with them. I've done some extensive whoop sections through with them, and they absorb it extremely well, as you're going to expect from ADS. And these are also a 3.0 body shock, which means there's just more surface area to absorb those impacts. So, the final verdict. Is it worth swapping the ADS shocks over the Bilstein shocks? I think it comes down to how you use your truck, right? First, are you towing with your truck? Do you have a side-by-side that you tow out to the desert, you off-road that, and then you put that back on the trailer and tow it with your TRX, right? Probably don't need the ADS shocks if you're not off-roading your truck. Second, the clanking noise I know does bother some people that daily their truck, right? If you're dailying your truck 99% of the time and rarely ever take out your truck, maybe that's not for you, right? Maybe the clanking noise does bother you enough that you don't want to. I think the last reason would be that warning message when you get in your truck. Some people have spent upwards of $100,000 on their TRX. They don't want to deal with things like clunking suspension and warning lights, right? My tuner does believe he can tune out that warning light, so we'll see back about that. But the clanking noise I do understand, right? What are the pros of the ADS suspension, right? At the end of the day, it's a 3.0 shock versus a 2.6 shock. Way better off-road performance. It's tunable. And one major thing is it's also rebuildable. These OEM shocks cost $3,200 from the dealership. $3,200 per corner. These ADS shocks cost right around $2,500, and they're rebuildable. That means if you come down wrong on one of the shocks, you can rebuild the ADS one, whereas the Bilstein you're replacing. For me, at the end of the day, it's a no-brainer to swap. I off-road this truck so much that the performance is worth it for me, as well as the rebuildableness of the shock. And lastly, the tuning, right? Adding a bunch of weight to this truck, the winch, the cap, the tent, deck system. It's just not something the OEM shocks were designed for and are able to handle. So being able to go in and make those fine-tune, not even fine-tune, but also large adjustments to rebound and compression to really dial the truck in, for me, was a no-brainer. So I do recommend it for those people that really want the most out of their truck. My name's Simon. This is Vader. If you guys could, please leave a comment on how I can improve. We're a new channel starting out. Make sure you like this video and subscribe.